In our study of Sri Aurobindo's commentary on the Kena Upanishad, we have come to Sri Aurobindo's description of the creative word and the special place that is given to it in the Vedic worldview. The chapter itself is titled The Supreme Word, and Sri Aurobindo rests the entire discussion on verse 4, which goes, "That which is unexpressed by the word, that by which the word is expressed, know that to be the Brahman, and not this which men follow after here." The Sanskrit text, Yad vacha anabhyuditam yen vak abhyudyate. Vak is the word, capital W, the power of speech, which is the creative power. And so the first phrase, Yad vacha anabhyuditam. An simply negates. Abhyuditam is bringing forward, raising up, placing before, and as a result, illumining, revealing, bringing into awareness. So that which is not able to be brought into revelation, awareness, placed before, by speech. And then the second phrase, yena vag abhyudyate, by which the vak is brought into expression, brought in front, revealed. That we know to be Brahman. And so Sri Aurobindo began this chapter by pointing out that we would have normally not put the word as the first of all these examples. We would have put the mind or the senses, perhaps even life before. But the Upanishad places speech and says, speech of our speech. And what does that mean? And that's where the whole discussion has grown. We will recall, he says that we have to divest ourselves of modern notions and realize as closely as possible the associations that lay behind the early Vedantic use of words. And in the Vedic system, the word was the creatrix. By the word, Brahma creates the forms of the universe. And the human speech at its highest is only an attempt to recover by revelation and inspiration an absolute expression of truth which already exists above in the infinite. This being the background, the phrase, the sentence now becomes more obvious. But Sri Aurobindo wants to help the modern mind to better understand what it is that the Vedic seers saw in giving such importance to the creative word. And for this, the rest of the chapter only elaborates in terms which the modern mind can understand. He says, all creation is expression by the word, capital W. In the biblical tradition, you find similarly in the Gospel of St. John, this phrasing that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And it is the same idea that it is all the way in the beginning, that is going back through all the levels of manifestation to the origin of things, the origin in space, in time, in causality, the beginning of everything, if ever there could be something like that, is obviously outside everything. And that which is outside everything, by which everything becomes, is the Word. That is the divine creative power, is God. And yet, it is not all of God, it is the power of God to manifest. And so it is with God, although it is God. You find the same idea articulated in Sri Aurobindo's Savitri, in the passage where he describes the Divine Mother, a power of silence in the depths of God. She is the force, the inevitable word. Again, capital F for force, capital W for word. A power of silence in the depths of God. So you must go back all the way into the deepest depths of the divine being, where all is silent. And yet the silence is not an emptiness, it is a pregnant power from which the power moves into manifestation, and that power is she. She is the force, the inevitable word. Force and word are placed next to each other because until the force is released, there can be no manifestation. But the force alone does not give form, it is the rhythming of the force, the vibration of the word, which creates the form. And it is by this word that the force brings the divine into domain of form and manifestation. If we had to take this at a very material level, in a very physical, rational, sensory perception of things, we could approach it in a different way, tracing Sri Aurobindo's description of the five elemental states. As you know, in the old yogic tradition, in the Vedic tradition, there is this concept of five elements by which all things are made: ether, air, fire, water, and then the earth. They represent, Sri Aurobindo explains, degrees of self modification of consciousness, by which that one consciousness, which is indivisible, formless, spaceless, timeless, one, moves into domain of space, time, form, multiplicity. How does something which is indivisible ever take form and multiplicity and divided appearance? It is impossible because it is indivisible. And so it does not really divide itself. It undergoes a kind of a self modification to its own perception of itself. And there are 5 degrees of that self modification, which we describe as the 5 elements. And the very first of these self modifications at the level of the ether is when it becomes aware of itself as vibration. It becomes aware of itself in varying relations with itself, like ripples, like waves of the ocean. The ocean is still exactly what it was, it is completely intact, there is no appearance of form. And yet there is a variation of relativities, very superficial still, in which nothing actually changes. If you notice a wave in the middle of the ocean, you place a boat on it. A wave may appear to move, but if the boat is touched by the wave, it simply rises up and falls back. The water has not actually moved horizontally, it has only moved up and moved down. Intensity of energy increasing, reducing in relation to itself. And these are the ripples, the waves of the ether. But because these relative it piles up and raises the water until the water breaks, and then there is a movement of water. Until then, there's only a movement of pure energy. It's something like this. In the first vibration of the Brahman, where there is only this vibration of Brahman knowing himself relative to himself, nothing moves. And yet there is a phenomenal appearance of moving vibrations which pass through each other. They're all transparent to each other. And then comes the second stage of self modification. When the vibrations pass through each other, there are patterns created. Waves combining with waves to create complex patterns. Patterns which are no more a simple rhythm, but combinations which create things which could not be captured by. In terms of modern science, we find this analysis because of the mathematician who demonstrated that any odd shape can be broken down into a series of pure waves, which when combined give this odd shape. What is interesting is if the odd shape is extremely odd, for example, a very sharp rise and a sharp fall, that edge can be created by a series of different frequencies piling up, but you will need an infinity of such series. So, in principle, a summation of an infinity of simple waves can give rise to any complex form of waves. This is the idea which I'm trying to get at. If in the etheric state there are only ripples, waves spreading all around, at the second stage, which is the aerial stage of self modification of consciousness, these waves have combined, and there's an infinity of waves. We would call it interference patterns, but very complex because an infinity of them can come together. And then at the third level of modification, which we call the of energy. And that is why the vibration from the particle extending we call a field of influence of the particle, a field of force. And further degrees of self-modification, the watery principle and the earth principle, only coagulate and make concrete and stable in appearance this vibrational pattern. We need not go deeper into it now. But what we can see in this description is the so-called fixed material universe that we see is nothing but degrees of modifications of pure, essential, indivisible consciousness going through a process of modification in its own perception of itself, which is vibrational. And then that one indivisible appears as this multiplicity, separate, divided. You pick up a flower and now you say, I've plucked it from the tree is separate from the flower. That's not true. It is still part of one single holographic whole, which could never be fully separated. And this is the concept in the hologram, that you can cut a piece of it and still see the full picture through the piece, but from a special angle. And the universe itself is like a gigantic hologram. You can separate the flower from the tree, but through the flower you can glimpse the tree, the mountain on which the tree exists, the planet on which the mountain exists, the galaxy in which the planet exists, and the whole universe in a grain of sand, in a flower within us. But all this is because there is a vibration behind which is universal, of which this individualized appearance is a special formation. Seen from this perspective, we can immediately recognize that the whole universe is nothing but a vibrational expression of pure consciousness. This is approaching it from the mind and through the senses. Where we see vibration, we can visualize vibration and thus understand something of the deeper truth. But as we will see, the deeper truth is more deep and at some point even goes beyond the conception of the mind. But this is a very good start. We can see here now that all creation is expression of vibrations, is expression by the word, the creative power of vibration, of sound. And then Sri Aurobindo says, and now we go to the deeper understanding of this truth. But the form which is expressed is only a symbol or representation of the thing which is. We see this in human speech, which only presents to the mind a mental form of the object, but the object it seeks to express is itself only a form or presentation of another reality. That reality is Brahman. So now when we come to this idea of vibration expressing something, we begin to recognize two things: the expression itself through the vibration and the thing which the vibration is trying to express. We could apply this to what we just discussed, visualizing the whole universe as a manifestation of a creative vibration in an underlying etheric substratum, pure consciousness. And then we would ask ourselves, why does that vibration come? What is it that guides the vibrations to take on this particular pattern of interference and then this particular form of appearance? There must be something in the originating consciousness which already holds the potential of this form, which already knows this form of which the vibrational pattern is one formulation, drawing, expression. What is that thing and how is it held in the pure consciousness? And this is where the mind finds it difficult to conceive. But at least it can understand, yes, there must be something already inherent in the oneness, indivisible oneness of Brahman, which this vibrational pattern now is able to bring into some form of expression. So the form which is expressed is only a symbol or representation of the thing which is, that thing, even if you didn't represent it, would always be there. And because it is not something in a representation, in a process, in vibration, it is permanent. That which is vibrationally expressed could be brought into expression or withdrawn, or could be modified or distorted. But the thing itself, which originates the vibration, is simply. In the way human speech works, we see this represented at a lower level. It presents to the mind a mental form of the object. When we speak of something, let's say a child says, I see a dog. I see and dog. Each of them brings in our mind a certain image, a certain idea, a certain association. I is a sense of pointing to oneself. But the word I, what does it actually say? Nothing in particular. It's like a gesture pointing to something. The finger is not the moon to which it points. I point to myself. The finger is not the me. I is only an indicator pointing to something which is so complex. If I say define who is this I, and it becomes so complex that it is outside the purview of even it cannot be expressed even in a series of books if you have to wholly describe who you are. And the same then most of our conversation is nothing but a series of indexes pointing to things which, if we had to define, we would end up with a tautology, a circular description. How do you define happy? You look up at the dictionary will say something like joyous. How do you define joy? The dictionary will say happy. So you will go on round and round because at the end of the day, there is no way to define what you're experiencing. So the thing itself is represented to the mind in a certain form. But still, this form in the mind, when you think of happy, you have an association, a cluster of emotions associated with this word, and then you know pretty much what you're pointing to. But a person who may not have experienced feelings would not know what you're talking about, the same way as a blind person would not know what is sight. So there's something outside the domain of complete formulation, and yet it is in the domain of mind because I'm able to be aware of my happiness, I'm being aware of myself, I'm aware of relationships between all these different things which I'm speaking about. And human speech only presents to the mind a mental form of the object. Object is a form I call them all trees. It's a general term. At that point, I could ask, what is it that appears as tree to me from the vibration of energy radiating visible to those with a slightly wider range of sight. In a sense, we are colorblind as far as the full range of vibrations exists in the universe. The tree itself right now is reflecting light or transmitting light in all this infinity of ranges of frequencies. We do not see them. We are colorblind and narrowed down to this very narrow band. If somehow we could see all those colors, all those ranges of frequencies, how would we describe the tree? We would see the tree reflecting and even radiating an infinity of ranges of colors, of vibrations. Made of those very colors or vibrations which condense to form this appearance of the tree, but radiating all of them because it radiates all that it is. And it would be infinite. The range of colors, the range of vibrations would be infinite. The quantity, the total quantity of energy radiating from it would be infinite. This is a practical problem in physics. You look at a single particle, you look at a single chunk of space, and it is composed of an infinity of frequencies combining together. And since physics cannot deal with an infinity practically, you have to find a device to cut out, put limits and cut out from the infinite a finite chunk. And then you can say, yeah, now we have an equation which we can process. But the reality actually is infinite. And thus when we approach whether a tiny particle of the atom or the tree or the galaxy, everywhere we see an infinite expression through the gateway of this so-called finite appearance. The finiteness being finite only because our perception is limited and finite. The thing itself is infinite. And the thing itself, if you go deep enough, is composed of an infinite energy, of an infinite combinations of vibrations outside the power of perception or even comprehension. And so approaching from a very physical, sensory beginning and going deep enough, we see that everything eventually goes back beyond the domain of our perception and then beyond the domain of our comprehension. In order to bring it into comprehension, we need to cut down an arrow from its infinity to some finite selected chunk. To bring it into domain of perception, we have to further dilute, diffuse, and limit that we can manage with our limited capacity. But reality, capital R, is another. So he says, but the object it sees, it seeks to express, is itself only a form or presentation of another reality, capital R. That reality is Brahman. And we have come across this idea before also in the Isha Upanishad, where everything in the universe is itself the whole universe representing a special front, is itself the whole Brahman putting forward an aspect, an appearance, a limited vibrational pattern of itself to distinguish and to make accessible to a limited perception that which is otherwise infinite and one, unique. That reality is Brahman. And now he goes back the sequence, beginning from Brahman to our experience. So Brahman expresses by the word, capital W, a form or presentation of himself in the objects of sense and consciousness which constitute the universe, just as the human word expresses a mental image of those objects. That word is creative in a deeper and more original sense than human speech, and with a power of which the utmost creativeness of human speech can be only a far off and feeble analogy. So that one infinite Brahman expresses by the power of a word, a form or presentation of himself, and entering into the domain of the objects of sense and consciousness. The manifestation itself, taking form, moves to a level which is here senses and awareness can grasp. Limited sense and limited awareness. And then the human speech takes that perception and tries to express a mental image of those objects. So you come to a very important idea. You will recall from the Isha Upanishad, this whole movement of manifestation described in three statuses of Brahman: Kavi, Manishi, Paribhu. Kavi is that which sees, not yet mental. It sees a supra-mental reality, the Brahman seeing himself in power, aspect, possibility. Manishi is then the second modification which brings into domain of although we are trying to refer to the same thing. And so in the Manishi stage, that perception of Kavir is reduced, but it's still subjective and subject to misunderstanding, therefore. And at the Paribhu stage, it becomes objectivized. We all point to the tree and we say, that is what I meant. And each one says, yes, now I understand. And yet, when they actually understand in their mind, what they see of the tree is different. And each one has a different awareness or understanding of what that is. On a very practical level, each one of us is seeing from a different angle to begin with. So we see the tree differently. We have each one of us in our perception itself a difference, and no two can see exactly the same tree because no two people can be seeing from exactly the same point. But then even when we grasp the picture and create within our mind an image, a representation, there's a whole cluster of associations which come with it. And that totality of the experience of tree, including its associations, is completely different because it is formed of our past and our existing body of knowledge and experience into which this is fitted, from which it can never be completely separated. It is all interconnected within the subjective Manishi consciousness. So even though it is objectivized in the Paribhu, in our perception we move back to a subjective version of that objective experience, and so on. So here we are discussing three levels. That which is the first expression by the word, by Brahman, putting a representation of himself in the domain of sense and consciousness, and this is what makes for the universe. And then the human word expresses a mental image of those objects. And the creative word of Brahman is what brought into manifestation. The human speech, he says, is a far off and feeble analogy. It also creates images in our mind. It can create even states, evoke states, modify. But still, it is a very weak analogy compared to that. The true power of the creative word of the Brahman, if it were to be brought into the human speech, then the human being could stand before a desert and say, forest, and manifest the entire forest. It could take a seed and say tree, and this tree, the seed would sprout and grow to become tree. Such would be the true creative power of the word, which is in fact how the Brahman manifests himself, not with the physical speech, but by the conceptual, vibrational, self-expressive word. So here Sri Aurobindo continues, the word used here for utterance in the text of the Kena, the word here, used here for utterance means literally a raising up to confront the mind. Brahman, says the Upanishad, is that which cannot be so raised up before the mind by speech. So we go back to the text. Yad vacha anabhyudyate. Sorry. Yad vacha anabhyuditam. Yen vak abhyudyate. So this abhyuditam, bringing before, placing before, etc. Confronting the mind, Sri Aurobindo says, literally raising up to confront the mind. Brahman cannot be made to confront, and yet it is by Brahman that the word brings before us, before the mind. He says, human speech, as we see, raises up only the presentation of a presentation, the mental figure of an object, which is itself only a figure of the soul reality, Brahman. So Brahman moves to manifest. You have a whole universe of sense and perception, accessible to senses and consciousness. Human speech captures something of that which cannot be fully captured, and then creates a mental representation of it within us. A figure of a figure. It has indeed a power of new creation, but even that power only extends to the creation of new mental images. That is to say, of adaptive formations based upon previous mental images. Now, if you see the actual nature of human creativity, you will find there are two kinds of operation. First, if I say draw a picture of an animal, what we do is we pull out from the existing storehouse any animal that at that moment comes up by association, and then we draw that. Why did I draw it from this angle and not the other? Well, because in my storehouse of memory, I had retained it as an image seen in this way. So I say draw a zebra. You have it seen in a particular way. Perhaps it is seen from the side. Very few people would draw it from the front. To seen from the front, you do not see the larger part of the zebra. You would see the head and then a very narrow frontal form. In our mind, we store a sideways image because it carries more information. So most people would draw a zebra from the side. But now if I say, draw something which you have never seen before, which does not exist out there, which is not known to your imagination. And we have a problem here. And as we have seen before, we have discussed this example. We tend to catch pieces from things which are already known and accumulate to create some odd creature, a chimera, a mix of many pieces of animals. Such a creature doesn't exist, but it's still made of pieces of known things. And I say, well, draw me something which is not known to you, which is not known to anybody. And notice what happens now. And this is the second category of creativity, the true creativity. Notice what happens. Your mind stops trying to draw from existing memories. Your mind automatically becomes quiet, becomes still, goes into a state of blankness, and waits until something pops up. And when something pops up into this quiet mind, we immediately find an association with it. Does it match something I already know? If it is matching, to this capacity of combining and drawing from existing images, adaptive formations based upon previous mental images. I take a previous image and modify it somehow. That's my creation. But the true creativity draws from something which has not before been expressed. The power which brought it into awareness of the mind, which gave it form in the domain of mind, is that creative power, or at least closer to that creative power of the word of Brahman. If somehow we could tap into that, if somehow we became aware of that, we could draw from it and materialize the object even simply by drawing directly all the way, bringing that material, that vibration all the way down to matter. As things are, we have that ability to materialize, not materialize, but mentalize, to draw down to the level of the mental vibration, and then we pass through a different process to materialize, to put in material form. I remember seeing long ago a video which discussed the genius, which showed examples of genius which were abnormal. Children who were autistic, dysfunctional to that extent, non-responsive to people, to the world, to the senses, but who expressed extraordinary genius in any case. And one example, there are of course examples of children who do extraordinary mathematical calculations without ever being taught, without going through any process. You give them complex 20-digit numbers and they multiply and write the answer straight away. You ask them how they do it, they say, we don't know. We just look at it and then the number comes. We write that down. We know it is that. How do you know? It is not in the domain of mind, it is up behind. But there was one case of a child. You could state the name of any animal and he would shape the animal with clay. There are others who might draw, but this boy was shaping it. You could tell him a kangaroo. He has never seen a kangaroo. He's never seen a picture, video, or anything. And he draws a complete three-dimensional kangaroo. Perfect down to the tiniest details. Where does that knowledge come from? And the word kangaroo as a mental form triggers in him the awakening at a different level where he captures something more true, where he knows more completely and he's able to then bring into creation in physical form. That creative power of drawing from that level all the way down to give it a physical form is an inspiration, is a revelatory power. And that's why earlier Sri Aurobindo used these words. Human speech at its highest merely attempts to recover by revelation and inspiration an absolute expression of truth which already exists in the infinite above our mental comprehension. So the things are already there. The moment you say kangaroo, it's an index which points to that thing, and this boy has access to that domain and is able to draw from it and give form. I do not know if they attempted ever to tell him dinosaur. And I wouldn't be surprised if he could then draw a dinosaur or one of the many dinosaur species. And if you ask yourself this question, what does the word kangaroo represent? It's a word in English. If you were to speak the same word in French, how would he respond? The word itself in the language is not so important. It is the thing it's pointing to that he is accessing, and that thing is already there. And you would simply catch that and express it in its most characteristic form. The archetype, we may say. So this human speech, you can see, has a correspondence to that creative power. Something of that creative power is even behind the operation of the human speech. But such a limited power gives no idea of the original creative puissance which the old thinkers attributed to the divine word. Literally, in that sense, we can say the world was born by Brahman speaking out the word. That is the creative puissance of the divine word. In fact, in the Sanskrit language, this is very interesting. The etymology of the words always goes back to some original, essential, deeper truth. But sometimes even behind the etymology, the root sounds themselves convey something of the original sense. Notice the word Brahman. You see, implied in the word Brahman is the totality, including the manifestation. Not just the source and the silence of the source, but the manifestation included along with the source, and the totality of it is Brahman. And you see the nature of the word at a very physical vibrational level, the root sounds, Brahman. So the very starting point is Bra. Starting with B. What is B? First there's a silence. You cannot slide into B as you can slide into a vowel. The you can rise from zero to something, but B is always a burst. There's an edge when it starts distinctly, and before that there's a silence. It is an explosive expression. Before B can explode, there's a build-up of pressure behind. The lips purse, the air pushes, know where the her ends, it spreads out into infinity. So there's the first, you can even associate it with the idea of the Big Bang. There's a release of an enormous amount of energy that physically expressing the truth of that as closely as the physical sounds could capture it. This is the beauty of the old languages, Sanskrit in particular, but most of the ancient languages which derive from the first language, they carry these possibilities of capturing the original deeper truths in the very sound and formulation. So the old thinkers attributed to the divine word this original creative puissance by which the whole universe, the cosmos, is spoken into, breathed into, manifests into manifestation. Sri Aurobindo now tries to bring this whole discussion to a level that the physical which modern science is now beginning to uh, experience or explore by different tools. And this we will keep for further exploration, but we can just read briefly what it is he's pointing to. If, however, we go a little deeper below the surface, we shall arrive at a power in human speech which does give us a remote image of the original creative word. We know that vibration of sound has the power to create and to destroy forms. This is a commonplace of modern science. Let us suppose that behind all forms there has been a creative vibration of sound. So he's taking it as a supposition. And then he examines the relation of human speech with the sound in general, and then tries to take through this step the idea that there is an original vibration behind every sound. Human speech can capture something of that original vibration and articulate it, and thus even have physical results to create or to destroy. That's the logic of the discussion. But still, all this is only, he says, a remote image of the original creative word, towards which again he moves back in the discussion that follows this. So this will take in the on the Sunday after next, which is I think the creative power by which the universe was born. Our words have a creative power. Even if that power is limited, diluted, and has largely a mental character, still it has a creative power, or by the same token, a destructive power. The mother observed that if you greet somebody and simply say good morning casually, it has no value. But if you actually mean it, truly wish the person well, the same words spoken now carry that good wish and can actually change circumstances. If we become aware of this, we can consciously infuse in our speech a genuine good intention. But we notice also how often we create strengthening those things which we have spoken. And so it is better not to say something negative at all. If at all we have to speak, try to give it a positive turn. And learning to become more concentrated is a better way than saying, oh, I'm always distracted. Most importantly, though, in the use of speech, we expend that creative energy in a haphazard, dispersive form. If the power of speech is conserved, and it's not speech itself, but the power behind, if the power of speech is conserved, then when we do speak, that power can act and be more effective. There are people who rarely or never speak a lie. And on the few occasions that they speak something which has not yet happened, the word conveys a power, a creative power to make it happen. This is what we see in the text I mentioned last time in Savitri, when Narad speaks out that 1 year hence Satyavan has to die. But when he says that, he releases the energies and the machinery of nature thereafter must fulfill. Otherwise, it was waiting as a potential not yet fully exercised in terms of time and form. But the same thing can be used as a power of speech to actualize positive things, to bring into effect things of the new manifestation which are waiting to be materialized on earth. And so it is a very important part of our spiritual life to develop what Mother calls the discipline of the speech. And she puts this in her description of the four austerities and the four liberations. She speaks of the training of speech, conservation of speech power, and its proper utilization. It's something which we can observe and try consciously to become aware of what we speak, the power which is released when we speak, and then consciously try to conserve and gather this power and then consciously exercise it where necessary. I have take a moment more to share an unusual experience, so I can keep it for next time when we speak of mantra. But I had this experience once. In the traditions, you are just taught not to speak out the mantra which is given to you by the Guru, because the mantra carries a certain power. And I remember once somebody came and insisted that I teach Sri Aurobindo's Gayatri. And I said, no, it's out there, it's written, Sri Aurobindo's given it, you read it, and he gives you the initiation. For some reason, she insisted, and I was still at that time very inexperienced in human ways. So out of a kind of a misplaced compassion, I said, all right, but I will speak it with you. You start speaking and I'll speak it with you. Simply to get done with that whole thing. And then as she started speaking, and then I started repeating with her, emphasizing the Sanskrit pronunciation and intonation, I could feel she was concentrating on the words, and I could feel her sucking the energy of the mantra. And that was the first time I realized that there was actually a certain gathered energy of the mantra within me. and that it could actually be not only transmitted, but it could actually be sucked out. It was a scary experience, and I stopped, I cut it, but I could feel something lost already. And so this gave me, for the first time, a concrete sense of how that energy actually exists as a separate thing in us, how it can be wasted or misused or even transferred, transmitted, or stolen in this case. So there is a certain power behind. That power in us is the representation in the human consciousness of the creative energy of the divine in a very tiny way, limited and diluted, but still it is there in us. And so when we speak and we utilize this, we have conserved and then we utilize consciously, we can release an energy that can manifest, make physical a possibility. The mother did this often. Simply, a yes spoken by her was a blessing and a power released given for manifesting that to which she had given sanction. So the title of this chapter is very suggestive, the supreme word. And there are many gradations of the power of the word, and it is the supreme word which this chapter is discussing. You can meditate for 3 minutes.